And that's what I have to share. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them or go back and look at any particular slide or drawing.
Can you go back to the slide that showed the first, it was the first construction drawing?
Okay.
It was like 1930s.
These?
Yes. You see who signed the approval? The Board of Health.
Right.
They used to be a lot more powerful. They weren't just enforcing EPA stuff. And that fellow that signed it, Sam Tay, my father took his place. That's the reason he came to Hawaii.
Oh, how about that?
Say again?
Oh, yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's interesting. I didn't know. So Sam W Tay, is it Tay?
Yes, it's a Scottish name. It sounds like it should be Chinese, but he was an old Scotsman from the days when there was a lot of Scots came to Hawaii, mostly because of the sugar plantation, mechanical.
And when did your father serve for the Board of Health?
He was the same job. They called it the director of sanitation. It's BJ McMorrow. You'll see his name on plans too.
Okay, we'll look for that. Well, thank you.
And the other thing I was going to say, I just missed those buildings that don't have the piping on the outside of them, right? The 4-inch cast iron. I think
that's right.
First thing my wife saw when she came to Hawaii was these buildings with all the plumbing on the outside of it.
Yeah. Oh, I should have included a picture of that. I'll have to do that. I'll have to add that in because that's definitely an issue, is plumbing and electrical.
And why is single wall construction not legal anymore?
Well, it's not permitted by it was never really acknowledged by the International Building Code or the Uniform Building Code, which preceded it. But the Hawaii amendments are silent on it now. I had a copy of the 1997 Hawaii Building Code, and there's provisions in there for walls without studs. And I went and looked at the subsequent version of the Hawaii amendments, and it was gone. And I think it's because of the continuous load path is difficult to achieve for hurricane, like for uplift. That would be what I suspect. It's definitely
and it may be to a degree for the shear forces with the new hurricane codes and that stuff.
Right, it's almost impossible to do to make them calc out to meet the codes now. Although you're permitted to repair them, so we're able to do repairs to them, but you can't build them new.
Sam Tay had a macadamia nut plantation on the Big Island, but he lived here in Oahu. And my father was the district engineer on the Big Island initially. So he would visit my father. And one time they went out to his plantation because it was just not getting the yields that from his plantation. Mm-hmm. And the caretaker there that was taking care of everything, saying that, they have minimum yield this year. So unexpectedly they drove out. Could you imagine 1930s, right? In an old car, get all the way out there unannounced, and here's the warehouse full of macadamia nut gunny sacks. The caretaker didn't expect Mr. Tay to arrive. See how low the shield was.
Busted.
The way it was in the old days.
How extensive is the termite damage? I would think on these old houses, it would seem like you almost have to tear the whole thing down.
Yeah, that's often the case. Some of the older ones have really, really high quality lumber. I've looked at one on the Big Island that dated from the 1880s. It's on the old Lagoon Estate. It's now in Kekahakai State Park. And that's actually in fairly good condition, I think, because, well, there it's so dry, that helps. And the lumber was really high quality. Somebody told me that on Kauai, before they had the good port at Lihui, they used to have to throw the lumber into the sea and float it to the beach and pick it up, and that the salt preserved the wood. I guess it's conceivable that that's the case, but I don't know. I think that's apocryphal. They also, because of that, they also didn't start building tongue and groove buildings on Kauai until later than the other islands. And I think it's because the tongue and groove would warp when it was off shipped that way, or offloaded into the ocean that way and floated in, whereas the planks would hold up. So just an observation that we made.
Told the same story about the floating of the wood, although I was told it was Douglas fir from the Northwest, and it was floated to the ship and salt preserved that way. But I have been told that same story.
I'll have to look into that, Virginia.
Yeah.
I don't know who we ask about such things these days. So many people who knew are not with us anymore.
Yeah. Also, I think the Hicks homes, which like you say, it was an evolution from the plantation. I worked on a house on the North Shore, and the 1 1/8" solid wood planks were redwood, and that would have also helped for termites, I believe.
Yeah. I live in a 1961 Ossipoff house with redwood 1x8 boards, and we have no termites at all. So yeah, the good quality lumber makes a difference. Well, thank you. Thanks for listening.
Barbara?
Yep.
Oh.
Anything else?
A quick question, Barbara, if you can hear me. This is Philip.
Hi, Philip.
Hi. The financing and ownership, land ownership in the plantations, when they were first given to the workers, resided with the plantation?
Yeah, they were often rented or leased, right? I think Ewa was one of the groundbreaking ones where people actually owned, the parcel in, outright with a fee simple, I think they call that. So.
And going forward in preservation projects, would you believe that the ownership should reside in an entity other than each individual, rather than, because they could be sensed as a very privileged location and property value in excess of just the square feet?
Well, Kunia, I know that the development corporation has held on to the title to the land, and they lease to the residents. And you have to be, low income, about 80% of that, up to 80% of the mean or average wage, and be working in agriculture. So there's a screening process. But at Ewa, I know people that that are not agricultural workers own some of those houses and own them outright. Now there's a community association that controls and reviews plans and such when you're doing repairs to them. So there's some oversight, but there's actually several different models like that. I think Grove Farm obviously has held title to the land, and they're leasing or renting to the residents. So I think the only one that I'm aware of being able to purchase at this time, unless you can think of another example, would be Ewa Villages, and that's because the city stepped in.
A couple of months ago, I drove into the one, I think it's called Verona, and I didn't know it was there, and it wasn't obvious that it was there either, except there was a sign and a dirt road, and I went in there. It was like going back 100 years. It didn't look like any of these houses that you folks have updated. It looked like, and there was nobody there because everybody was working, but so it was like going into a ghost town. But it was loaded with mango trees, all kinds of things like that.
The mature landscaping is phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah. It would be a tourist destination. I don't know what the tourists will think of it, but it's dazzled me.
Yeah, Verona is actually the one that has been in the paper recently that's slated for the next redevelopment. So what they do is they repair existing housing stock, and then they build infill housing on lots where the house is either, has been removed or torn down. So I think that's what they're planning to do. So keep an eye on that, because I think that's happening now. Those are, the Verona Village in particular has a lot of Ted Vieira houses in it. They're mostly dating from the 40s. They're a little newer than some of the other camps out in Renton or Tenney. There's some real gems.
Just going to say the Verona thing is, it's almost like you wouldn't know it was there. There are no major roads to it. Where there are roads, I think they follow the old railroad track. It's really a nice place to go on a Sunday drive.
Mm. Well,
where is this, Mac? Verona?
It's in Ewa somewhere along the railroad track.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a little offshoot camp. You have to go through Ewa Villages proper, where the churches are and whatnot, and past the mill. And then there's a little road that goes probably to the northwest slightly. And there's the old camp there. Of course, it used to be surrounded by sugar, and now it's just scrub. But it's worth a drive, because it's going to change radically, once the city starts to redevelop it.
Yeah, I arrived in 1988. Just when at the tail end of all of this, we had some projects out in the Ewa Plains, and it's amazing that drove out there, because they still had the sugar cane out there at that time, and now it's all gone. So as most all of you have seen, I'm sure.
So even the plantations are certainly we're losing that housing stock, and there's been a few pockets that have been preserved. But I think single wall in our residential communities is also going to be a thing of the past. Not in our lifetime, and maybe not in our adult children's, but in our grandchildren's lifetime. I think there'll be fewer and fewer single wall homes, on the ridges and in Kaimuki and, throughout Honolulu and Hilo and elsewhere, just because they're difficult to rehabilitate, and energy costs and lumber costs and such. So we're not seeing it yet, but I think even the Hicks homes and the Lewers and Cooks homes and such are we're starting to see the demise of those as well.
Well, let's say my house was built in 1970 out here in Kaneohe, and it's all redwood.
Mm-hmm.
Before this house falls down, the people are going to come and get the wood. Because redwood per foot now is not like
right.
1970.
That's right. Hang on to it.
I resonated with your memory of the cane fields in Ewa. I came in 1984, and yeah, we still had the cane fires, and I actually drove out to watch them set the cane fires, and watched it burn, and it's really striking, just awe-inspiring.
Terrifying.
Yeah, I visited Hawaii in 1982 and was taking the Pearl Harbor tour, and I remember looking up and seeing this gigantic column of smoke out towards Ewa, and I thought, good grief, what is going on out there?
Yeah, looks like a major disaster, but it's that's just a cane fire.
Yeah.
And I couldn't quite imagine why burning didn't just char up your sugar, but I guess it's a form of drying it out enough to make the squishing process more effective.
Well, I think they burn the cane fields after the harvest, and that way it works.
That's right.
So they harvest it and then they burn it, and that's
it's kind of a primitive harvesting. So then it's all laying around. But the ones I've seen on fire, the plants were still vertical.
They were. So you're saying they burned it before? For the harvest they burned it.
Yeah, they're getting all of the dry or less green leaves burned off. So when it gets into the mill, those aren't in the way of the crushing, and also they don't have to handle them, because if they had all arrived at the mill, you'd have had twice as much stuff being hauled away.
Right? Makes sense.
And as soon as you pull the cane out of the ground, it starts to lose its sugar content.
Wow.
And it's like, not like 1% or something like that. Within a day, it can lose 10%. And if it rains and you can't get in to get it, you can really lose a lot of your sugar. And when it burns, it starts to lose its sugar. So the idea is to get it out as fast as you can to the mill while you store sugar in it.
It confused me a little bit early on, because one of the byproducts was bagasse, which was the shells after the squeezing and after the burning, and it still had enough combustible power to run the entire plant that was processing the sugar cane. And it was why AmFac had an edge over other competitors to have the H-power set up. And they were claiming that they were in the best position because they had that technology of just burning lots of stuff, and they would just add their own bagasse to the process. And the second was that they owned a lot of water, and you needed fresh water in a electric power plant. And when you evaporate, the products of moving and recycling the water is expensive. If you have a lot of good pure water, that reduces the whole energy cycle. So, but it didn't get located where they wanted it, so they didn't get the contract. In fact, lost that bid. I helped.
Barbara mentioned that house with good quality wood. During all my career, a lot of it in Micronesia, and I couldn't even guess anymore which island it was on. I was shown a house that was literally built of, let's say, top quality mahogany. And whatever happened, you stop to think about what it's going to cost to get wood there. I don't think they picked the mahogany. It was just the cheapest wood they could get. Being the huge distances, you had to ship wood at that time. So it was kind of fascinating. That house would be worth a fortune in wood.
Incredible.
Yeah.
We're looking at a property on the Big Island. It's for state parks. It's a cabin. It was a ranch cabin up in Hamakua, and the entire thing is single wall plank of koa. Koa floor, koa roof framing, koa foundation piers, because that's what they had.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So,
the original plantation or ranch house on Parker Ranch, they have it. They moved it so you can see it, but it was kind of remote during its useful days. But it's, I think, at least 1 inch thick, but 12-inch wide koa planks. This whole house was virtually a block. It's not too elaborately designed, since it was like Kamehameha was the first, was still alive. But yeah, hard to believe, right?
Really?
yeah.
Barbara, what might be your next preservation project or style of living?
Hey, what am I doing? Still working on the cathedral. I presented that in 2014, and I'm still down there fussing with that choral building. That's kind of interesting.
Oh, yeah.
They need to replace their air conditioning right now, so that's a bit of a challenge for them. I'm still working on the Doris Duke property at Black Point. Now we're like restoring the restoration and just fiddling around the edges.
What's the likelihood of that being a more vibrant, viable tourist point?
Well, they're limited by a really, really stringent conditional use permit in that neighborhood. They're only allowed to have 96 people a day, 3 or 4 days a week go down there. So that's really what's limiting them. They're trying to reach out and use other sites and do things virtually, but you know, honestly, the draw is being on that property. They just can't accommodate that many people because of the terms of their agreement with the city. So I think that's limiting for them.
And who owns the property now?
It's the Doris Duke Foundation. So in her will, she left a trust to oversee it. And they're out of New York. They have offices in Rockefeller Center in New York. Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. That's their grant making arm. And they have the property at Black Point. There's a property in New Jersey, about 300 acres. That was her childhood home that they still manage. And they've divested, they have a house in Newport, Rhode Island. That was hers that they manage. She used to have property in Manhattan. She had property in Los Angeles, and they've sold a lot of those, and they've consolidated their holdings. But there's a local arm that runs the Black Point property.
What's your feeling is if you created a model that you would say the Doris Duke House is now open as a hostel for wealthy hostelers, and that in addition just to looking around, and the revenue would be equal or greater than it's currently generating, but there'd be people there that are comfortable enough to respect it as a place they're going to spend 2 or 3 days, get up in the morning, have coffee, tea, or whatever, and conversations similar to a arrangement that I saw in the Haight-Ashbury area of San Francisco, and make that as a new model of generating wealth for the foundation's continued good efforts.
I would say the Doris Duke Foundation does not need help generating wealth, to be honest. That building, it's not run for profit. They farm out, the tours are run by the Honolulu Museum of Art, the docents from there. They do have a scholar in residence program and an artist in residence program, but they're not open as like a homestay for others. So they actually pay people to come stay there rather than the reverse you're talking about.
But I'm wondering, would that model be something that a preservation person like yourself might look and ask that it be tried? And I'm thinking also of Sturbridge Village in Massachusetts, an amazing, vibrant city during the open hours, but there's also an opportunity to, why not just stay overnight? Yeah. Get up with the cows and go down to the river and that kind of thing. Yeah. As a tourist, I'd be willing to want that experience and pay well for it. And then that would give more revenues. I'm just curious on the revenue side.
I could see, something like Grove Farm could be wonderful to, stay at as a homestay. I think, although I don't know whether they need our money either, to be honest, but there are lots of historic properties that could use an infusion of cash that way. So
I don't think we're going to see Shangri-La as a bed and breakfast. So
no.
The people now down there.
As much as you'd want to stay there,
What's the reasoning for that, Mac? That you don't think it's that comfortable, or you don't think it's appropriate?
Well, I just think probably being shot by the neighbors would be the first detriment to your health. People don't want that kind of stuff thing in their neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, you can't drive onto the property unless you're there for, I could drive on when I go, and the staff can drive on, but the public has to be escorted on. I mean, their conditional use permit was one of the tightest I've ever seen. So that would all have to be renegotiated.
Well, bed and breakfasts here are already being limited, so just getting approval would be probably hard. But I agree with Mac and you, Barbara, that's they don't need the money, so they wouldn't be entertaining that kind of proposition, I think.
For me, growing up as a kid, that there was a lake that had cabins, and never could we imagine that we'd ever own a cabin by a lake, but rich people would, and you might get jealous, but all of a sudden, for 1 week out of our life as a kid, we could go down there and run up the hill and pump the water into a bucket and run down, and my mom would make food and breakfast, and we really felt that we were engaged in history and in nature in a way that without that opening, I think I would have lost something. And when I see beautiful estates, and the whole concept of timeshare was to give you something you couldn't afford but on a week basis. And I see it for myself as a model for engagement with things that it's good to have people have in their hearts, that kind of lingering affection for it. Recognizing that my dad, by contributing just a few nickels for the Statue of Liberty, that he remembers those nickels and he associates that kind of commitment that he was there to be associated with it. And I hope that some of those historic places can be shared in that more genuine, I've been there and done that.
I was working in England, and I think it's the National Trust that you can join. And with being a member of the National Trust, you can go over and visit, dozens of huge old British mansions. And we used to tour around on the weekends and then have picnics right on the grounds. And I remember one in particular was right by the Thames River. We'd go down and have a picnic right on the Thames River as if we were the owners almost. In July, I'm hoping to get back to, actually in August, back to my hometown in Butte, which is an old mining town. And there's a huge mansion there that they have turned into a bed and breakfast that I'm planning to stay at, which is, I used to deliver newspapers to it when I used to live there. So.
And now you can sleep there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, nice.
Wow.
I like the scenario of that access, but not if it becomes such a commercial attraction for the owners. Somehow I feel that there's got to be a transition into it being a historic, owned by the community. But then I start worrying about, is that socialism versus opportunities for income? Any thought in that regard? Because I know here right in Waikiki at the end, there's a number of historic houses that there's a contract if they open them up. And I've never been successful in going into one of them that is supposed to be open once or twice a month. And that mechanism makes me disappointed because it's not made easy to know.
Right. So if a home is on the historic register, the state register, they are required to provide visual access from the public way a certain number of week times a year. You don't get the right to enter, and you don't get the right to step on their property. But like if it's a fenced property, they have to open their gate and at least let you see the house on certain Saturdays 6 times a year or whatever it is. But there really is no law or mechanism to allow you to tour the interior of historic homes just because it's on the historic register. Now, there's a group called Malama'u Manoa that does do tours of historic homes in Manoa, and those homeowners will voluntarily open their house sometimes and let people come in and visit. But those are organized by a community group. So that's pretty interesting.
That's a different attitude because they're proud and sharing versus the other that are getting significant tax breaks by just sitting there and not changing the outward appearance. But it's not the same genuine, how does it feel to live there? I had the opportunity to visit the Diamond Head Lighthouse, for example. the living quarters for the Commandant of the Coast Guard. And what an amazing privilege. And then they had their son, he got the lighthouse itself as his room and living quarters.
Wow.
And again, I was just fortunate, I mean, just coincidentally fortunate that I got invited to see these things and sit down with the commander and just talk story. But in a sense, that being a public access, what as a preservationist might you suggest is how easy should that be? And have I been charged a lot of money because I was unique in getting that privilege, or should I, because I was a good caretaker in that experience, just be blessed?
Well, I would just say that I think preservation of historic structures does have public benefit, right? I think there's a net advantage to the community. People do get a tax break, property tax break. They pay a minimal administrative fee. And the idea is that they throw that money back into preserving their home, because there are expenses above and beyond the ordinary home maintenance that they may face by, keeping their home on the register and keeping it historic. There are development opportunities that they may forego, right, by keeping their home on the historic register. So that's kind of the trade-off there. Whether the public should have access to the interior, or or be able to step on private property, that's, I don't, I mean, we have pretty strong private property rights here in the US, and mandating that people open their homes to the public is a little controversial. You can pay to tour historic homes. Look at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. They own a number of historic homes that you can tour for a fee or for free sometimes on special days. So there are opportunities to do that. Not so much in Hawaii, unless a group like Malama Omanoa is having their, open house days. And even then, they collect a small fee to cover their expenses. So, well, I don't know, Virginia, okay. What do you think?
In Dickens' days, those of us down in the poorhouse just looked up at the house on the hill, and that was good enough. I realized times.
Easily pleased. That's good.
Well, a couple of presidents let me come into a White House, and they have long lines doing it. So it's doable. And I'm just wondering if that generous model of our presidents might have other applications.
Yeah, well, I think it would help people appreciate their historic resources in their community if you could see the inside as well as the exteriors.
Virginia, well, thank you for indulging my question.
Yeah, well, the White House is a national park, though. So, it's those visits are subsidized by your taxes.
Final comment, Virginia?
Yep.
Oh, no. I did want to make a comment that one of the programs that's useful, this is not getting into residential, but the Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program, which is available for historic properties. Commercial properties. Mm-hmm. And that then allows and encourages the preservation and restoration of commercial properties, which then are open to the public.
That's right.
So I think that doesn't address the quality of life of understanding how the person in the manor lived, but our commercial buildings too, are gems, and that's all. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for having me.
For indulging us here, and
nice to meet you all virtually.
Virginia.
Thank you.
So Barbara, you've got one of these.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
All right.
So we presented that in 2014, and we'll try and get this copy to you as well.
Privileged group. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity, for your attention.
Yes, well, thank you very much. We appreciate it. It's a very interesting subject.
We can all give a round of visual applause here, if you would.
Yeah.
Okay.
Barbara and Sam, this will conclude the formal part of the meeting, but the formal meeting is now adjourned.
Watch episodes and offer your comments and insights in an email to eahawaii@gmail.com.